Mishnah and DAF Chaf Vav Amud Aleph. Kol hashofros kesherim chutz mishel para mipnei shu keren. Now, first of all, we have to realize yesterday's Mishnah was a totally different topic. It was about Kiddush HaChodesh, and it was really a continuation of all of the previous Mishnayos from the second chapter of Rosh Hashana. Mm-hmm. What's problematic is why the Perek began with yesterday's Mishnah, and not with today's Mishnah. Today's Mishnah is a totally different subject. We're no longer talking about Kiddush HaChodesh, we're talking about the laws of shofar. Mm-hmm. So there are those who actually say that really this is the beginning, this Mishnah is the beginning of the Perek and not yesterday's Mishnah. But in the way that it's listed, at least in our Gemara, it seems to be a little bit problematic as to why yesterday is included in this Perek. But in any event, this is really the first Mishnah about the laws of shofar. All shofars are kosher for blowing on Rosh Hashana, except for a cow's horn. Why? Because it's a keren and it's not a shofar. The name of it is different. So Amar Rabbi Yossi v'halo kol hashofros nikru keren shenemar bimshoch bekeren hayovel. So first of all, how do you know that the thing that you blow on Rosh Hashana is a shofar? The Torah never says the word shofar in the context of Rosh Hashana. It says zichron trua. It's a day of remembering the trua, the shofar, the blast of the something. It doesn't say the word shofar. So the answer is that the word shofar is mentioned in the context of the Yom Kippur of Yovel. On the Yom Kippur of Yovel, as is mentioned in Parshas Bahar, it says you're supposed to ta'aviru shofar b'chol artzechem. You shall cause the shofar to be blown in all of your lands. And we see that there is a scriptural, there's a gzera shava of trua and trua, of blowing and blowing between the Yom Kippur of Yovel and Rosh Hashana. So that's how we know that a shofar has to be blown on Rosh Hashana. And it has to have the name of a shofar. A cow's horn is not called a shofar according to the Chachamim, and therefore it's not valid. Comes along Rabbi Yossi and says, I don't understand. Here's a pasuk in Sefer Yehoshua that says, talking about the the walls of Jericho, right? It says, V'hayabim shoch bekeren hayovel, that it will be when you blow the horn of the ram, kishamachem es kol hashofar, when you hear the sound of the shofar, etc., etc., etc. So you see that the shofar, both from the first part of the pasuk, which talks about the blowing of a ram's horn, which a ram's horn is a shofar, and still it's called a keren. So, and then it's connected to the shofar later on in the pasuk. So very clearly you see that a shofar is also called a horn, is called a keren. So therefore Rabbi Yossi argues that you can use anything that's called a keren because it's associated with shofar.
Rabbi, isn't shofar also mentioned by Har Sinai? He called a shofar.
Right. Right. He called a shofar holech b'chazek ma'od. Yes, correct. That's absolutely correct. But we don't find it in connection to Rosh Hashana. Right. Okay. Now the Gemara says, by the way, just as a public service announcement, if those who are interested in doing the DAF tonight, at 1:15 in the Turk Beis Medrash, I'll be giving both DAFs over Shavuos. I'll give back-to-back DAFs. 1:15 tonight. I'll do DAF Chav Zayin and DAF Chav Ches. So if you want to just knock them off and have the rest of Shavuos to yourselves or whatever, or learn something else over the rest of Shavuos, it's really up to you. Okay, just meet me in the Turk Beis Medrash at 1:15. Okay, so Gemara now says, Shapir Ka'amar Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan. So Shapir Ka'amar Rabbi Yossi. The Gemara's question is, Rabbi Yossi has a good argument. You see from the pasuk in Yehoshua that a ram's horn is called a keren. The Rabbanan's response is, Kol ha-shofros akru shofar v'akru keren. Depara keren akri, shofar lo akri. Answers the Gemara, you're right. A ram's horn is called a keren too, and it's also called a shofar. But a cow's horn is only called a keren and is not called a shofar, and that's why it can't be used. Dichsiv b'chor sharo hadar lo v'karnei re'im karnav. Because we see the only reference to a bull or cow's horn in the Torah is in reference to Yosef, and there it's called a keren, karnei re'im karnav. The horns of the re'im are its horns, the horns of Yosef, who was compared to a bull. So it's only called a keren, it's not called a shofar. Rabbi Yossi Amar Lach de Paranami Akri Shofar. Rabbi Yossi's response is, no, I'll show you a source where a cow or bull's horn is also called a shofar. Dichsiv V'sitav Lashem Mishor Par. Now, David HaMelech asks God, may my prayers be as desirable to you, Hashem, than a shor par. Now, let's just be clear. Shor and par are the same animal. What's the difference between a shor and a par? A shor is a young bull. A par is a mature bull. So the question is, im shor lama par, v'im par lama shor. Why is the pasuk mentioning both? Either you want to talk about a young bull, you want to talk about a mature bull, but don't, So ela my shor par, mi shofar. But rather, says the Gemara, what does it mean? What was David really saying? He was putting the two words together because he wanted to connect the idea of a bull to a shofar. So he puts the two words shor par, which sounds like shofar if you remove the resh. So therefore, you see, that's an allusion to the fact that a bull's horn is also called a shofar. The Rabbanan k'der Rav Masna. The Rabbanan have a totally different view of that pasuk. The Amar Rav Masna, my shor par, shuhu gadol kipar. That what do the words mean, shor par? That David HaMelech was actually saying that may my words be as pleasing to you, Hashem, as a young bull who is as strong and as mature as an older bull. And I think that there's actually a very relevant imagery there of a person who is both young and mature at the same time. That he's young and youthful and exuberant and excited about prayer, but he's mature to be able to find the proper articulation to be able to approach God in a mature fashion. So that's actually why David was putting the two together. So it's got nothing to do with shofar, according to the Chachamim. Ula Amar Hainu Taimid Rabbanan K'der Rav Chisda. Ula now tells us, you want to know something? The reason for why a cow's horn is not kosher has got nothing to do with the name Karen, but rather it's got to do with Rav Chisda. The Amar Rav Chisda mipnei ma'in kohen gadol nichnas bevigdei zav lifnai v'lifnim la'avod avoda. Why is it that on Yom Kippur, when the kohen gadol goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he's only allowed to wear white clothes, he's not allowed to wear his normal vestments which have gold plating in them? So the Gemara answers, Lefi she'ein kategor nasa sanegor, because of the famous principle that the prosecutor cannot become the defender. And what that means is that gold is a reminder of the cheta egel, of the golden calf. And therefore you cannot go into the Holy of Holies with something that is reminiscent of the golden calf. In the same vein, the reason why you cannot use a cow's horn is because a cow is reminiscent of the egel hazav, and that's why it cannot be used on Rosh Hashana. So frak the Gemara, wait a minute. V'lo, you mean you can't use a prosecutor as a defender? V'ha'ika dampar. What about the fact that you bring in a bull's blood into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur? So there's a prosecutor. Ho'il v'ishni ishni. So the Gemara says, no, since it's not in its original form, it doesn't look like a bull anymore. It just looks like blood. It's no problem. Frek the Gemara, v'ha'ika aron v'kapores uchruv. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, there's plenty of gold in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The Aron is made out of gold, the Ark cover, the Kruvim are made out of gold. What do you mean you can't have gold in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? So the Gemara says, Chote bal yakriv kamrina. No, what we mean to say is that when I, as a sinner, meaning I am complicit in some way because of my ancestry, my connection to the golden calf, I'm not allowed to bring gold into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But if there's inanimate gold, that's God's gold, because it's part of the Aron, that's not a problem. It's only when I bring a gold in, and I am connected to the Cheta Egel, then that's in Kategor Nasa Sanegor. V'ha'ika kafu machta. But what about the fact that the Kohen Gadol brings in golden instruments to bring in the incense and the coals into the Beis HaMikdash? There he's bringing an offering with gold. So the Gemara says, Chote bal yisno'e ka'amrina. No, that's not a personal effect. We're talking about a personal effect that he uses to adorn himself with. That's where we say Ein Kategor Nasa Sanegor. So therefore, if you're using golden vestments, that would be a problem. But to bring in a utensil that's only used as a service utensil, that's not a problem. Notice that according to this, the shofar is considered to be a personal effect because I'm directly connected to it. It's something that I'm using that's directly connected to my person that I blow through to connect with Hashem, and that's why it's no good. So, correct the Gemara v'ha'ika bigdei zahav mi bachutz. But what about the fact that as soon as the Kohen Gadol leaves the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he puts on his gold investments? What about in Kategor Nasa Sanegor outside? So the Gemara says, Min bifnim ka'amrina. No, it's only a problem in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. But outside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, there's no problem of in Kategor Nasa Sanegor because it's not as intimate of an approach. So the Gemara says, Shofar nami b'chutzu. But what about the fact that you don't blow the shofar in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? You blow the shofar outside. So why should there be a problem if it reminds you of the Cheta Egel? The Gemara says, Kaven de lizikaron hu kibifnim dam. Very profound answer. The very fact that the shofar is invoking God's memory to remind him of the Akedah, to remind him of the Zechus Avos and so forth, then it has that sense of intimacy of walking into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's a very powerful statement because it really indicates the power of the shofar. The power of the shofar is such that it's as if you're walking into the Kodesh HaKadoshim when you blow that shofar. So now the Gemara says, ve-chatima mipnei shehu keren ka'amar. I'm sorry, ve-chatima mipnei shehu keren. I think that's where you put the question mark. 1 second, says the Gemara. What about the fact that the Mishnah doesn't say, mipnei shehu keren ka'amar. I think that's really the way you punctuate it. What about the fact that the Mishnah, in telling us the reason why the Chachamim invalidate a cow's horn, is because of its name, not because of ein kategor nasa sanegor. So the Gemara answer is chada va'od ka'amar. Chada de ein kategor nasa sanegor, va'od mipnei shehu keren. So you have to explain that the Mishnah is giving us a secondary reason. Primary reason is because ein kategor nasa sanegor. You can't use something that reminds you of the ve-chatima egel to blow shofar. Second reason, it's not even called a shofar, it's only called a keren. Rabbi Yossi, Amar Lachsana, Rabbi Yossi's got to respond now to two arguments. Deka amart ein kategor nasa sanegor hani mili mibifnim, v'hai shofar mi bachutzu. So first of all, your argument of ein kategor nasa sanegor, that's only in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. I don't buy that argument that the shofar is like being inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's outside, so it's not a problem to use a cow's horn. And to your second argument that it's not even called a shofar, well look, all shofars are called kerens, all kerens are called shofros, and therefore it's no problem. Abaya Amar Hainu Tamayo Derabanan Shofar Amar Rachmana Velo Shnai Mushlosha Shofaros. Abaya says this is the real reason why the Chachamim invalidate a cow's horn. The Torah says blow one shofar. It doesn't say blow multiple shofros. V'ha depara kevin dekoi gildi mischaza kishnai mushlosha shofaros. What's the problem with a cow's horn? It grows. I'm not a cow expert. I'm not a bull expert. Maybe full of bull, but I don't know bulls, right? So the thing with cows and bull horns is that they grow in increments in such a way that it's like scabbing over, is the way the Gemara describes it. It's like different layers of horn material that grow on top of each other such that you can see the segments of the different parts of the horn that layer over each other. So therefore, the Gemara's argument is that it's like 2 or 3 shofros instead of one uniform, homogeneous shofar. And that's why it's not usable, because it's like multiple shofros instead of one shofar. Frak the Gemara ve-chatima mipnei shehu keren ka'amar. But the Mishnah said that the reason is not because of its multiple shofros, but rather because it's not called a shofar, it's called a keren. The Gemara says, Chada v'od kamer, same answer, that it's a secondary argument. Chada de shofar echad amar rachmana v'lo shnai mushlosha shofaros v'od mipnei shehu keren. Number one, it's not valid because it's like multiple shofars all combined together. And argument number 2 is because it's not called a shofar, it's called a keren. Rabbi Yossi. Now Rabbi Yossi has to give 2 defenses. Amar lacha de kamart shofar echad amar rachmana v'lo shnai mushlosha shofaros kevin de mechabri adodi chadu. My response to that argument that it's multiple shofars is that's not true. All of these segments of the cow's horn are connected, and as such, it is one shofar. Udika amart mipnei shehu keren kol shofros nami yakru keren. And to your suggestion that it's not called it's called a keren, it's not called a shofar. Well, all shofars are called kerens, all kerens are called shofars, and therefore it's not a problem. Now, the Gemara's question now goes back to the pasuk that we quoted from Yehoshua, which said, "Bimshoch bekeren hayovel," that with the blowing of the keren of the ram. So you see that a ram's horn is called a keren too. So my mashma da hayovla lishna de dichra. Where do you see that this word yovla implies a ram? Where do you see that the word yovel implies a ram? So the Tanya Amar Rabbi Akiva keshahalach de la arvia hayukaron ledichra yovla. When I went to Arabia, they called a ram, they called it a yovla. So therefore you see that the word yovla in the pasuk, keren hayovel, is referring to a ram. So now that we've launched into this idea that sometimes you can learn the meaning of words by traveling to foreign countries or listening to the way people speak, we're launching now into a whole series of similar examples of where the rabbis did not know the exact translation of a word that's either in the Mishnah or in the Tanakh, and through hearing other people speak in either other languages or the vernacular, they were able to figure it out. Va'amar Rabbi Akiva, like Rabbi Akiva says, Kishahalachti legalia yukorin lenida galmuda. When I went to a place called Galia, I noticed that they called a menstrual woman, they called her a galmuda. So what does it mean? My galmuda, gemula da mi ba'ala, that she is destitute from her husband, or separated from her husband. That's what the word galmuda means. Va'amar Rabbi Akiva, Kishahalachti la'afriki hayukorin lama'a kisita. That when I went to Africa, they used to call the coin that we call a ma'a, they called it a kisita. Lamai nafkamina, what difference does it make? So the Gemara answers, Lefrushe mea kisita deoraisa. Because it says that Yaakov Avinu bought a piece of property from Shechem. He bought the city of Shechem from Shechem, and he paid mea kisita. So you want to know how much mea 100 kisita is? Look at our ma'a coin, which is also called a donkey, and that'll tell you how much he paid, mea donkey. Amar Rabbi Kisha.
Rabbi Akiva visiting Jewish communities in these places or non-Jewish communities?
He was looking for the South African community, right? That was probably, I don't know where, I don't know. I have no idea. Probably, or he could have been going to, there must have been some, there clearly was, in Egypt, there was clearly a Jewish community. So whether that's what he's calling Africa, usually Africa is a reference to Ethiopia. Many times that's what Chazal mean when they refer to Africa.
He says Galmuda means separating from the husband, so it must be Jewish community. That's what they called.
Yeah. It seems. Well, in that certainly in that example. Not necessarily, because Nida was a phenomenon that was pervasive in other cultures as well. Okay, so Amar Rebbe, Kishalachti lekirchei hayam, Rebbe said when I was going to the island places, hayukarin lemechira kira, they used to call the word sale, they would drop the mem and just call it kira instead of mechira. Lamai nafkamina, what difference does that make? Lefrushi asher karisili, that to explain the pasuk, when Yosef speaks to his brothers on his deathbed and tells them that his father made him promise that he would bury him in Eretz Yisrael, in the land that he had purchased, which is the Maras HaMachpelah, he used the term Asher Karisi, that I purchased. And the word Karisi is really Machirisi, right? In other words, that I had arranged for purchase. Amr Shimon ben Lakish, Keshalachti l'tchum kanan nashraya, hayukorin lakala ninfi ulatarnagol sechvi. When I went to this place called, literally it means the boundary of the eagle's nest, but probably is just the name of a city, they used to call a bride ninfi, and they used to call a rooster sechvi. Lekala ninfi micro, what's the pasuk that's indicative that a kala is called ninfi? So it helps us understand the following pasuk. Yefei nof misos kol haaretz, that Zion is called the beautiful nof, the joy of all of the land. So therefore, what it means now we have a new insight into what Zion is called. It's the bride of Hashem. Not just, not the word nof usually means a neighborhood or a suburb or something. A view. A nof is also a view. But the point is that it doesn't just mean a nof, it doesn't mean a view or a suburb, it means a bride. V'latarnagol sechvi, and they used to call the rooster the sechvi. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav Yibais Emer B'Shua ben Levi Mikra, and what's the pasuk that helps that? Now we understand. Mishas betuchos chachma uminos an lasechvi vina. Who places in the tuchos wisdom, right? And who gives the sechvi understanding? Mishas betuchos chachma elu kloyos. Who places in the tuchos wisdom? That refers to the kidneys. The reason why kidneys are called tuchos is because the word tuach means smooth. It's a smooth organ, right? It's very smooth on the surface of the kidney. Ominos an lasech vivina zet tarnagol. This refers to the rooster who has the understanding to crow right just at the crack of dawn. Levi ikla lehahu asra asa gaver lekameh. Levi once went to a certain faraway land, and a man came before him and said, Amar le kaba'an planya, that planya was kaba'an. Now, a certain man was kaba'an, and Levi lo havayada my kamerle. Levi had no idea what the guy was saying about, Yankel was kaba'an. What does kaba'an mean, or kavan? Asa shol be medrasha. So he went and asked in the base medrash, Amrulei gazlan Amar lach. He meant to tell you that he was just robbed by Ploni. That's what he meant to say. As it says in the pasuk, shall man steal from God? Amarle Rava mi barnish l'Ravashi, ihavoy hasam havamina lehechi kavaach b'may kavaach b'may kavaach u'memela v'yadana. That if I was there, says Rava, he says, I would have had an easier solution. I wouldn't have had to go to the base medrash. I would have just asked the guy, Ploni was kava'an? How did he do it? Why did he do it? And how did he, and with what did he do it? And what I would have, through this interrogation, I would have figured out what the word meant, because he would have told me, well, he came up from behind and he just grabbed my wallet and, he mugged me and whatever. And then I would have understood what the word kava'an means. So the Iyusavar Milsa the Isur Kamarle, but so why didn't Levi do that? Levi was also a Chacham. The answer is that Levi thought that the word kava'an was not that he did something to me, but that he did some kind of Isser. So therefore, asking him, how did he do it to you, would have been a silly question, because he didn't know he had completely no idea what kava'an meant. So, lo habayadi rabbanan my seirugin. The rabbis knew a Mishnah. The Mishnah says that you're not allowed to read Megillas Esther b'seirugin, right? And they didn't know what the words, at one point they lost the meaning of the word seirugin. So, shamua la'amsa devei Rebbe de chazatanu rabbanan dahavu aili piski. So they noticed one day that the maid of the Rebbe I guess had passed away, but his maid must have been an older woman. She knew the language of the Mishnah just by having grown up in Rebbe's house. So she noticed that the rabbis were going into the Beis Medrash in small clusters. 1 minute, 3 guys would walk in, 5 minutes would go by, and then another 4 guys would walk in. And she said to them, Amr lahu ad masayatem nichnasim seirigin. She said to them, why are you going in like in patchwork? Seirigin. So Seirigin means reading the Megillah intermittently in different segments out of order. That's really what Seirigin means. So therefore, that's how they understood what Seirigin meant. Lo habu yoda rabbanan mai chalug lugos. The rabbis didn't know what the word chalug lugos. It's a certain vegetation. Yom echad, and because the Mishnah says that a zav should not eat chalug lugos because it increases his zera, and we want to try and make sure that he doesn't have any emissions. So Yom Echad Shamu la'amsa devei Rebbe dechazes lahu gaver dekomevader par pechine and Amrlei ad masayato mefazer chalug lugecha. The man was just sort of throwing away and spreading out all of his par pechine, and which is a certain type of herb that the rabbis did know. And she said, why are you spreading out or throwing out your chalug lugos? So that's how they knew what chalug lugos are. Lo havu yadi rabbanan my salsala usaromemecha. There's a pasuk in Mishlei that talks about Torah, and it says, "Be misalsel v'Torah, and it shall raise you up." But they didn't know what the word misalsel means. So Yom Echad Shamula Amsu Devei Rebbe Dahavas Amr Lahu Gavra Dahavakama Hapich B'Sarei Amr Lei Ad Masayata Misalsel B'Sarecha. That they looked at the maid of Rebbe. She saw a guy twirling his hair. Maybe he was twirling his payas. It's not clear what he was doing, but he was playing with his hair, curling his hair. So she said, how long are you going to be misalsel your hair? Like, stop wasting time. So then they knew that it means to curl or turn it over. Turn over your hair, like we say, hafoch ba v'hafoch ba dekula ba. That's really what Shlomo Melech was saying, is that turn over the Torah and you'll discover new things all the time. Lo habu yadi rabbonan mai uta'atesiha b'mitatei hashemad. There's a pasuk in Yeshaya that says v'tatesiha b'mitatei hashemad, that I will be mitatei Jerusalem with the mitatei of destruction. So what does that mean? Yom echad shamu la'amsu devei Rebbe dahavas amrs lechaver tishkoli tatisa v'tati beisa. But then they heard the maid of Rebbe saying to her a fellow maid, she said, pick up the broom and sweep the house. So then they knew that the word means to sweep with a broom. And God is basically saying, I'm going to sweep out Yerushalayim like with a broom. Another beautiful pasuk in Tehillim, it says, thrust upon God your Yahavcha, and He will sustain you. So they didn't know what the word Yahavcha means. So Amar Rabba Bar Barchana Yom Echad Hava Azlina Bahadi Hahutaya Hava Darina Tuna Varmalishkol Yahavich V'Shadi Agam Loi. One day I was walking behind an Arab peddler, and I was carrying a burden on my back. And the Arab turned to me and he says, take off your Yahavcha and put it on my camel. So my camel will carry it for you. So therefore we know that when the pasuk says, thrust upon God, your Yahavcha means place all your burdens on God. It's not my problem anymore, Hashem. It's your problem. It's your burden, and Hashem will sustain you all the way. What a beautiful thought. Okay, next Mishnah. Shofar shel Rosh Hashana shel Yael Pashut upia mitzupa zahav ushtei chatzotzros min hatzdadim. Now, the Mishnah here is contrasting 2 times when we blow shofar over the course of the year. One is Rosh Hashana. The other time that we blow shofar during the year, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash certainly, and maybe even after, is when there's a tainus. When there's a tainus, the Torah says you're supposed to blow chatzotzros to assemble the people for prayer. The trumpets, the silver trumpets, in the Beis HaMikdash are supposed to be blown to assemble the people for prayer. And you're also supposed to blow the shofar in the Beis HaMikdash on Rosh Hashana. But the difference is as follows. On Rosh Hashana, you're supposed to use the horn of a mountain goat, which is straight. It's a straight horn. And you're supposed to plate its mouthpiece with gold. What about in Kategar Nasis on Agar? All right, we'll get there. Okay. Ushtei chatzotzros min hatzdadim. And the shofar is in the center, and it's supposed to be flanked on either side with the chatzotzros, because since the main blowing of the day is the shofar, and the chatzotzros are only accompaniment, that's why they're on the sides of the shofar, which is in the center. Shofar marich v'chatzotzros mekatzros shemitzvahs hayom b'shofar. And consistent with that is that the shofar's sound is supposed to last longer than the chatzotzros. In other words, they start blowing both at the same time, and then the chatzotzros taper off, and the shofar keeps on going because that's the main mitzvah of the day. Uvetanios b'shel zecharim kefuf v'mupiyah mitzupa kesav u'shtei hachatzotzros be'emtza. But it's just the opposite on a fast day. On a fast day, you're supposed to use a shofar that's not straight, but rather that's curved or bent over like a ram's horn, and it's supposed to be plated with silver, and you have the two trumpets, which are to assemble the people for prayer on a fast day. They're in the center, and on the flanks are two shofars, one on either side. Shofar mekatzer v'chatzotzros maricho shemitzvah sayom b'chatzotzros. And on a fast day, they begin blowing the shofar and the shofros and the chatzotzros at the same time. The shofar tapers off, and the chatzotzros continue because that's the mainstay of the mitzvah. Shaveh hayovel Rosh Hashana l'tkiya v'librachas. And finally, the Tanakama says that the shofar of Rosh Hashana is exactly equal to the shofar that you use on Yom Kippur of Yovel, for both the blowings that you're supposed to do and for the brachos, meaning the amida that you say for Musaf on Rosh Hashana, which is 9 blessings. It's the same kind of amida that you do on the Yom Kippur of Yovel.
Only the trumpets were used for Milchama? No shofar?
Chatzotzos were used for Milchama as well. It's not clear, at least from this Mishnah, whether they use shofros as well for Milchama.
Yeah,
but here the Mishnah is only contrasting Rosh Hashanah and Tainus. It's not talking about Milchama. It could be because by the time the Mishnah is being written, there was no more militia within the Jewish people. I'm not sure.
In the Midbar, there was also blowing when they were traveling. No?
In the Midbar too. That's right. They would blow the Uskatem B'chatzos Ros, this week's Parsha. Okay. Now Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rosh Hashana token b'shel zechar muviyovlos b'shel ye'elim. Rabbi Yehuda fundamentally disagrees with the Tanakama. You Tanakama hold that on Rosh Hashana you're supposed to use a straight mountain goat's horn. I hold that no, on Rosh Hashana you're supposed to use a curved ram's horn, and only on Rosh Hashana of Yovel are you supposed to use a straight mountain goat horn. Let's take a look now at the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Levi, mitzvah shel Rosh Hashana v'shel Yom HaKippurim b'kefufin v'shel Kol Hashana b'pishutin. So Rabbi Levi disagrees with our Mishnah. He says that on Rosh Hashana you're supposed to blow a curved ram's horn, and the same thing on Yom Kippur of Yovel, and it's only during the rest of the year when there's a tainus are you supposed to use a mountain goat's straight horn. Frek the Gemara v'hatznan shofar shel Rosh Hashana shel Yael pashut. But the Tanakam of our Mishnah says you're supposed to use a straight mountain goat horn for Rosh Hashana. Huda Amar ki haytana. So the answer is that he learns like Rabbi Yehuda, the other Tana. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'Rosh Hashana yutoken b'shel zecharim kefufim u'b'yovelos b'shel Ye'elim. Rabbi Yehuda says that on Rosh Hashana you're supposed to use a curved ram's horn, and only on Yom Kippur of Yovel are you supposed to use a straight mountain goat horn. Frek the Gemara v'leima hilchasa Rebbe Yehuda. Why then didn't he just say, I paskin like Rebbe Yehuda? Why did he have to tell me a halacha that sounds like he's inventing it himself? He's just repeating Rebbe Yehuda. The Gemara answers, Iyamar tilchasa Rebbe Yehuda havamina afilu shel Yovel nami Rebbe Yehuda svira lei kamash malan. You might have thought, if he just would have said, I paskin like Rebbe Yehuda, that he paskins like Rebbe Yehuda for Yom Kippur of Yovel also. Now remember, Rebbe Yehuda does not hold of this Gezerah Shava, that whatever horn you use on Rosh Hashanah, you have to use on Yom Kippur of Yovel. And that's why Rebbe Yehuda says that on Rosh Hashana you use a ram's horn that's curved, and on Yom Kippur of Yovel you use a straight mountain goat horn. Comes along Rabbi Levi and says, I paskin like Rabbi Yehuda for Rosh Hashana, but I hold of the Gzeira Shava. So whatever you use on Rosh Hashana, you also have to use on Yom Kippur of Yovel. And that's why he doesn't say, I paskin completely like Rabbi Yehuda. I only paskin partially like Rabbi Yehuda. He says you can use a mountain goat horn, a straight horn on Yovel. I hold it also has to be curved on Yovel as well. So now the Gemara's question is, B'mai kamifli. Let's try and understand the machlokas between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, the Tanakam says on Rosh Hashana you use a straight horn, and Rabbi Yehuda says on Rosh Hashana you use a curved horn. What's the machlokas? Marsa Rabbi Rosh Hashana kama dekayif inishdaite tfei mali. That Rabbi Yehuda holds that on Rosh Hashana, the more that a person's thoughts are hunched and bent over, the better it is. In other words, on Rosh Hashana, a person is supposed to be approaching God with great humility and a sense of contrition and brokenness. And that's represented by the curved shofar of Rosh Hashana, of the ram's horn. Uvayom HaKippurim, kama deposhet inishdaite tfei ma'ali. And Rabbi Yehuda, since he doesn't learn of the Gzeira Shava, he says that on Yom Kippur, which is a day of proclaiming that slaves go free and everything goes back to its original owner, dun, da, 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 it's like the public announcement, right? So therefore, it's got to be a straight shofar, straight, tall, and making it known throughout the land. That's why it's supposed to be a straight shofar. Umar Savar, B'Rosh Hashana, Kama Depashit Inishdaite Tfei Ma'ali. Now the Tanakama disagrees. The Tanakama says on Rosh Hashana, when you pray, don't be hunched over when you pray. When you pray, stand tall and lift up your palms to heaven. Right? Nisa levavenu el kapoyim, will turn up our hearts upward, heavenward. That's the posture that the Tanakama advocates when you're standing in prayer before Hashem. And therefore you have to stand up tall. And that's why the shofar is supposed to be straight. The Bach just includes the words. And uviyom haKippurim nami degomer gzeira shava. And the Tanakama says, because I hold the gzeira shava to Yovel, just like the Rosh Hashana shofar has to be straight, the Yom Kippur shofar has to be straight. Uvita'anios. Why then does he say that on a tainus the shofar has to be curved? So the Tanakama agrees that on a tainus, when you're fasting because there's a drought, kama dekayif inishdaite tfei mali. That's more appropriate to bend yourself over in contrition and in humility because you're asking God for a reprieve of the drought. So that's the basic machlokes, right? And of course, as you know, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda here. We paskin that on Rosh Hashana the shofar has to be a curved ram's horn, and for other reasons as well, because it's also supposed to remind us of Akedas Yitzchak. Have a wonderful Yom Tov.